everybody, and welcome to the Media Show. My name is Nick Pallavita, and today we're going to be discussing the death of Twitter. So with that, we're going to bring in some of our experts from around the world. First, Shaquille Latmer, who's always shy and pleasant about issues that take place around the world, and Rick Rosner, he's actually in Australia, and Rick Rosner, who's in the area of Los Angeles, who's a member of the Mega Society and a former writer for Jimmy Kimmel Live. But we're going to start with the conversation of Twitter. We know Elon Musk has bought this kitchen sink when he bought Twitter for $44+ billion. Question is, Rick, and I'm going to start with you because you're out in the West Coast. Is Twitter going to be around in the next couple of years? You know, he's already said he may have to file bankruptcy. He fired half the staff. It's not looking good. What are your thoughts about Twitter?
I even if he keeps scuttling it, eventually it'll get, at some point, instead of going away, somebody will sweep and pay like 1/5 of what he paid for it. Come in with an offer of $9-10 billion, and I don't think he'll be able to drive entirely into the ground. He's made it a less pleasant experience. It's more broken than it was, but people are hanging in there because it's still so useful.
Yeah. Well, go to Mark Lee. You've been in broadcasting for 100 years plus. So you've seen things go up and down from the radio industry, the TV industry. Now we have the social media industry. What are your thoughts on Twitter? Is Twitter going to be a survivor? They're playing a survivor game. Are they going to be
definitely playing a survivor game? I think that they'll be around for a while because definitely a lot of people use them in order to get their messaging out, whatever that messaging is. They are definitely one of the more rapid sources, and just in the way that their news is constantly coming at you all the time. And that has been one of the things that people have liked about it, but it's also been one of the complaints that people have had even before Elon Musk and others got involved in the purchase and all in that space. But definitely it is a popular tool in the social media landscape. So a lot of folks enjoy it, just like they enjoy Facebook, Instagram, and a number of other things. And, just as soon as one becomes popular, something else new and better comes along. So I do remember the days of things that are not here anymore. And I'm sure that Rick even remembers some of the ones I'm getting to mention, because there was one called 6 Degrees of Separation and Friendster, and even some of the things like MySpace that are not around anymore. So definitely it will probably get at some point maybe go the way of the dinosaur and other things in that space. But I don't think that that's going to be immediate. And just like I think that TikTok will be around for a while as well. And one of the things that I've been thinking about, and I was actually going to bring it up on our economic show, is a lot of people in the media lanes, and I'd love to hear what Shaquille has got to say about this, have been concerned about the monopolization of the social media lanes. And they're afraid that what we have created is a lot of big companies out there that are the power brokers, and that maybe it's time to do like a Baby Bell kind of thing and break them up into smaller units and all in that line, because we remember what happened with the telephone companies when they were considered to be a monopoly, and then they broke them up. But definitely, whether it's in the social media lane or whether it's in the regular, more terrestrial radio lane, there are definitely some major players there that are the big players, and in some cases they're one of only 4 or 5 entities. So maybe it's time to break them up and all in that space. But Shaquille's in the economics lane, so maybe he's got some thoughts as to whether I'm onto something, or maybe it's not something we need to be considering.
It's been a very interesting couple of decades, hasn't it, really? If you go back to say, when I was a child, and you had economists like Milton Friedman, he would often talk about, how unfair it is that TV licenses and radio licenses are sort of bid for, and the person with the most money, gets them, and they have this monopoly power. And I think it's very easy today to look at big tech and say, well, look, they're ruining the youth. There's all this disinformation and misinformation that's getting out there. And, you're trying to walk down the street. There's some kid dancing in front of their camera to make a TikTok video. That was my dance move there, by the way. So
ratings just went through the crowd.
The ratings went up for that. But, the fact of the matter is that living in the world today, we actually have access to a lot more media. We have access to a lot more content. We can find people that we like or whose opinions we like, and we can tune into them and see what they have to say. So in that way, it's good that we've seen the internet become what it has. I think that when the internet first was around, the idea was that it was free information available to everybody. And it was kind of like a no-no. If you go back 20, 30 years, companies that tried to make money from the internet were sort of looked at with some level of derision from the public. It was, you can't do that. And, the old chat channels on the old IRC networks, if you were on those, you didn't want to go to a paid-for service. And now they've seemed to have monetized it. So, look, I think perhaps there is too much concentration of power. I think that the accusation that's being leveled against some of these tech companies is that certain tech executives are going to have political views, and they're going to change algorithms or change the accessibility of information so that their particular political view gets the most amount of coverage, and less other opinions don't get as much. And that's probably been an issue that does need to be addressed. And I hate to say it, but I think it needs to be addressed by government. I know government normally screws things up, but I think that government needs to step in and say, look, what is acceptable, what's not? Because there is a part of me that actually feels quite sorry for the tech companies. You're not going to hear me say that very often. But, if you look back at what's happened in the last 10 or 15 years with young people who perhaps have been bullied online and they've done things to themselves and that sort of stuff, there has been a big push in the public space to say to the tech companies, look, you have to do something about cyberbullying. You have to do something about all these different things. You have to do something about the kind of content that our youth have access to. And then when they go and do it, you'll have invariably conservatives say, well, we were just trying to tell the youth about whatever it is that the conservatives are going for. And you have the left that is saying, we were just trying to get information out, and that's been silenced. So I think that there has to be some rules that everybody has to kind of follow. I think the main thing is that freedom of speech should be there. But of course, if something is completely untrue, well, there is a question there of should it be allowed to be published? Should it have a platform? Or is it something that we don't have any hosts, by the way, Jatovi and Rick, so just keep talking until they come back. But yeah, should somebody step up and be in charge of that, and who should that person be? I think it's a really interesting question, and I think that's going to be the thing that'll be the defining thing for the tech companies moving forward. That's my view on it. Jatovi, welcome. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you too, Shaq. How's it going?
Good. I've been over in New Zealand.
Good to see both of you guys. Yeah, good to see you too, Rick. My guess is you're talking about coming in late into the conversation.
So Mark was asking me whether the big tech companies should be broken up, especially the social media companies. Should they be broken up? And I've sort of answered with my opinion of the pros and the cons, what they have done for us, and some of the cons was what his question was.
I mean, should they be broken up? Probably. Yes, to an extent, but also you don't want to. I mean, you're having to fight that monopoly issue. So you're having to fight where one company dominates the price points of everything else. For example, there's a big battle right now with Microsoft, and they're trying to take over Activision Blizzard, and they're having to fight a lawsuit where the government itself is trying to say that they are not able to do so due to the breaking up of the big companies, I guess, would fit that avenue. But there is a counter protest by the developers and the other programmers saying that it would be a good idea for Microsoft to take over Activision Blizzard. The thing is that Activision Blizzard is just one of a multitude of independent gaming companies out there. And I think that the whole gaming world is brand new to the minds of many, especially in the States. And so Microsoft taking over Activision Blizzard isn't as big as a monopoly or monopolizing the the content around gaming as a lot of people outside of the gaming world see. I mean, yes, Activision Blizzard has a decent catalog of games. However, in comparison to a lot of the other developers and a lot of the other distributors, it's still just another small company being taken over by Microsoft, which I'm okay with that one.
So Jatovi, I think an interesting point there is one of the things that I said before was about how hard it was in the past for people to get information out. If you wanted to run a radio station, you'd have to apply for a license, etc. Today, you can just set one up. It takes you 10 minutes, and you set one up, and you're on air, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's do it.
I think one of my fears would be that if really large companies end up essentially monopolizing, the gaming space, you're going to sort of see what you saw in the media space, which is that you might be an aspiring singer or an aspiring actress or whatever, but your ability to actually get out there is hampered by the fact that you need to get distribution from one of the big guys. And this may end up being the case where you and I decide, hey, we're going to create this new video game, but because we don't want to sell it to a big company and we want to get it out there, it becomes very difficult for us to do that. And as a result, there's less variety of games for people that want to play them.
Well, just a pushback on that, I think the bigger issue really isn't the actual acquiring of the companies themselves. And what you touch on in the distribution arena, that distribution is magnified by the internet. And the internet is the actual battle space, I think, that we have to really be wary of, and how that becomes regulated and how that becomes hampered by, say your big name companies, or say your it's that internet space is the distribution for a lot of places. And with the invention of, the technology and the evolution of AI, because AI, anytime anybody brings it up, I always go harken back to the actual analogy that radio killed the video star, video killed the radio star. And it was the advent of the evolution of the videos and the TV that made it tougher for radio. However, those who adapted actually began to blossom. And it's the same thing with AI coming on, because AI, there's a game that just got released called High on Life, which was created by the guys who did Rick and Morty. They actually used AI artwork within that actual game. They didn't really get bought up by a big company, but their distribution arena, or their distribution area via the internet and via Game Pass and via all these extra avenues, that's how they were able to get their game out the way that they wanted to distribute it. And that goes on. That's with the App Store. The battle that Epic wants to have with the App Store is a great battle, because it opens up the idea, or opens up the payment scale that is kind of gouging those smaller developers. So the more that we can keep an eye on the actual distribution network, because that's most important, more so than the buying up of Microsoft and Activision Blizzard. The distribution network being the App Store, being the Google Play Store, the Xbox Game Pass, the PlayStation Store, the Epic Store, all these, and that's just in the gaming world. So to use it as an analogy for the, other products. So say, for instance, you want to create a donut shop. If you had an avenue to the same, if you had access to the same distribution network that Dunkin' Donuts has, or that Krispy Kreme may have, you may have a better opportunity than just, hey, I need to fight all these giant companies, or I need to fight Walmart. But if you had the same access and the same lawyers that Walmart has, you could actually have a good outcome in that battle. Because right now it's true in the gaming industry, it's a battle over distribution, and that distribution of internet.
But that's my point, isn't it? That if some of these bigger companies are to be broken up, you would want to see more competition within these distribution networks. It's like I actually asked one of my friends recently in California, I said, why is it so difficult, just out of curiosity, because I'm not in the tech space, it's not my strong suit, I always shudder whenever I buy tech stocks, but I have to do it. Why is Google where they are? Why can't I set up, Shakoogle and, have a go? And they were actually talking to me about the, how they scan for the websites and this sort of directory that they have. And they were saying basically it's only Google and Microsoft that have them. And so all the other companies basically have to rely on theirs. And I thought, well, that's really the anti-democratization of information, isn't it? That's not what the internet was supposed to be. And I hate to ask for government intervention or to say that government needs to intervene, but I think that anybody should be able to come in there and actually be able to compete if they've got the right ideas and they can attract enough users. Rick.
Yeah, Rick.
Jamie, one of you go.
Oh, it's Rick. Rick just jumped up.
Eric.
So I don't think next 2 years, we're going to have kind of competent government intervention spaces because the House is looking very dysfunctional. And I doubt they're going to be able to get it together to, the House is owned by Republicans and some of the Republicans are kind of crazy and the Senate is Democratic and nobody's going to be able to get it together to do governmental stuff to fix these spaces.
I highly doubt, Rick, that even if there was a significant majority by Democrats or Republicans in both chambers, that much would change. And we were actually discussing this on the last show on Economics Mondays, that unfortunately the political process, it just doesn't achieve very much generally. And oftentimes what it does achieve doesn't actually solve the issues that were originally brought up. Yeah. And look, I see that with the crypto space. Look, I really want to like crypto. I've always wanted to like crypto, the idea of a decentralized currency, etc. But we've seen all of these issues, and now there's a push for more regulation. But, if you regulate it, then you're going to run into some of the problems that cause people to like crypto in the first place.
But also, Shaquille and Rick, there's another problem out there. It doesn't matter what Congress says or does think, because a lot of the regulations, they turn around, they say the enforcement will be at the discretion of, let's say, the Department of Justice. So this whole thing that's going on between the FTC, which had to turn over the case to the Department of Justice to sue Microsoft, is done with or without congressional approval. Mm-hmm. In my industry, I get not attacked. I have to fight the Department of Labor all the time. PBGC, Internal Revenue Service, they operate independently of Congress. And I think a lot of people think that, well, Congress controls these agencies. They don't control these agencies. As a matter of fact, how they do it is they write in the law that these things shall be administered and taken care of by the agency. And then they let the agencies, frankly, do what they want to do. So whether Congress does anything at all or not, it will not make a difference when it comes to how these, with antitrust and FTC enforcement. That'll all be up to the
Lee Newton Rhodes makes that point very pointedly. Lee Newton Rhodes makes that point very pointedly on his politician shows. Because
in other words,
what he says is that Congress,
Democrats here.
But by Congress acting that way, what they're essentially doing is they're offloading their responsibilities as democratically elected people onto non-elected bureaucrats.
And glitchy.
Really, I think that should be challenged.
Tell if anybody else is
by the
talking
way,
at this point.
Every day. Okay. Yeah, Rick. Yeah, Rick.
The head of the new head of the FTC is said to be more concerned about consolidation in various industries than previous heads of the FTC, but nothing still getting done. The meat packing industry is now controlled by 4 giant meat packing companies, causing farmers to suffer. I mean, and the meat, the meatpacking industry is hundreds of years old, and if they can't fix that, they're not going to be able to fix these brand new industries.
Right.
Well,
And I
I'm a
think
strong
one of the-
believer that the reason that happens. Sorry, Jatobi, you go for it.
Oh, I was just going to say one of the problems, and that's speaking on, I guess, the political side as well as trying to do these regulatory ideas, is that we try and do a lot of one size fits all, and the meatpacking industry should be regulated completely different from the gaming industry.
I agree.
Should be regulated completely different than the tech industry, which should be different than. I mean, it should be a case by case basis, but we do a lot of the one size fits all, and that creates a problem in the political realm. And the political realm is where those individuals that we're trying to vote to do these things, but then they offload it because they don't want to be the one to be demonized of being, they're controlling our lives and trying to take away our this or trying to do this. So to get votes, you actually just have to stay as middle with your base as possible, so you don't really change much.
Yeah.
So
and by the way, I'm against the FTC. I mean, and the Department of Labor chasing Microsoft on this Activision Blizzard. First of all, they're going to spend $70 billion to do the acquisition. That's a lot of money, as you know, Jatovi. Number two, I hate to say it, it doesn't ruin my life if I buy or don't buy a bloody video game. Okay, I'm sorry.
No, hang on. Sorry, no. Hang on.
I just don't care. I mean,
hold up a second.
I'll find entertainment elsewhere.
Nick, that's exactly where the issue lies, though. This is where you saw in decades past, where you saw the US government come in and pass laws to increase the price of sugar. And most people say, it adds 1 cent a pound to my sugar price, I don't care, when it was a direct subsidy to farmers. This is where you've seen the US government come in and give incentives to farmers to burn their tobacco crops, and then give incentives to other farmers to grow more tobacco crops. So this does impose a cost, even if it doesn't affect you directly. But just because it doesn't affect you directly doesn't mean that it's good government policy. I believe that a big part of the reason why you are seeing these massive, massive companies exist is because of a number of factors, such as over-regulation and overburdening of regulations, because of high cost of wages that often comes from unions. I don't think that they're intending to make the lives of business people that difficult, but often what you're going to see is that the costs of employing people go up. The cost of compliance goes up significantly. And so your smaller businesses and even your mid-tier businesses end up outsourcing a lot of that work, or they end up being taken over by bigger companies that have a much larger economy of scale. If I was to be a small business and I was to break the labor rules and I got in trouble for it, I could very well go out of business for doing that, because I'm a small business. But if I'm Walmart and I employ 100,000 people and I breach the labor laws, I'm going to pay a fine and I'm going to be okay. And you often see this very, very aggressive kind of behavior from big companies where they break the rules that the rest of us are supposed to abide by. They get away with it. And what ends up happening is it becomes a scary proposition to want to go into business or to want to try and compete if you don't have those resources.
But also sometimes they don't, Shaquille. Okay, first of all, here's the reason I'm against this FTC, the Department of Justice getting involved with Activision. Okay, I'm using my hard-earned tax dollars to support this litigation with lawyers fighting Microsoft. For what? Because somebody's going to have more control over the entertainment industry. Who cares?
Hey, Nick, but I've got a question for you.
It doesn't seem to bother you, Nick.
Okay,
but Nick, it doesn't seem to bother you that for example, your tax dollars has been spent to prevent me from buying gold from the New York spot gold market because I'm not a US citizen, right? So I can't take advantage of the difference in the spread between the London and New York market. Now that doesn't bother you because you're not affected by it. But guess what? It's your tax. It's your tax that have intervened in that market. But
I-
no,
Nick
but that's,
and
you guys should be able to.
Shaquille.
Not able to, and it's your tax dollars that has caused
Yeah.
that situation to exist, and it's absurd. That's why there's
It is
such a
absurd,
huge
right.
discrepancy.
But hold on a second, Nick and Shaquille and even Jacoby. I'd love to hear folks' thoughts about this because there's another case that is actually in the law as well, and you'll love this, Nick, because actually it comes from the lovely place of the West Coast. Because I do know that all of the tech giants, or the major tech giants, including TikTok and Facebook under the guise of Meta, and Google under the guise of Alphabet, are being sued by a school system because they are saying that the whole big tech companies are responsible for the worsening mental health crisis among our students, and that has directly affected the students' abilities to learn and to get their educational stuff going on. So they just filed a lawsuit. I think it was like yesterday or something along those lines. But that has definitely been getting a lot of
That'll never be
in the media.
successful.
Okay,
That'll never be
that's one. What? Okay, I saw that, Mark. That's one of very crazy lawsuits that are out there right now. I mean, even this, I think, is crazy. I think it was the European Union fined Facebook or 400 million for this. They use your data to determine what ads you get. Okay, come on. That's the reason. That's the reason they have it, is so that they can show me what the big deal is. Okay, of course they're going to use the data.
The European Union has
What
passed
ads
rules
they
against it.
go to.
The European Union has passed rules against it, and those rules were breached. So
Well,
that's
what are you-
the problem. Well, you're not allowed to harvest data the same way you can in America and the European Union.
That's because the European Union sucks on
Well,
that.
it doesn't matter whether you think they suck or not. They have the right
Actually-
to exert their sovereignty the same as
Okay,
America
but-
does.
and
And if you have an American company going in there, you're required to abide by their rules, just like the rest of us are required to abide by your
Hold on a
country.
second, Jacoby. What is your thoughts around this suit? And Shaquille said it's not going to fly, it's not going to work, nothing's going to happen with it. But what's your thoughts?
Well, in all honesty, I mean, that suit is just it's another, as Nick pointed out, it is a frivolous lawsuit because the amount of control stuff. However, Shaq did bring up something earlier, which I wanted to touch on, because you were talking right before you had started talking. We were talking, I was telling you about, how talking about how the regulations should be handled different for different companies. And that brings up a question. Are we talking about so these larger tech companies, which I completely agree with, are able to get away? Well, actually, larger companies in general. And it's the same thing that we deal with as just individuals. Those rich individuals are able to get away with a lot more. However, if you look at one of the things that I think actually worked really well, and that is, and yes, it is all jumbled up in jargon, but one of the ideas that worked really well in the area is a progressive tax rate, because the more you make, yes, the more you're going to end up paying in taxes, because the more you're going to utilize. Could that, in terms of litigation and regulation, work dealing with, small to mid to larger businesses? Because if you deal with a progressive scale, then those same companies that can pay that same $10,000 easily, compared to how those small mom and pop shops can't pay those $10,000, if you do a progressive scale, could that help alleviate the situation that we're in terms of regulation?
I think, if I'm understanding you correctly, that you're essentially suggesting that there be a progressive system of regulations. I think that's essentially what you're suggesting.
Yes.
Let me just I'll address a couple of things. Firstly, I don't believe that progressive rates of taxation work very well when the system is too progressive. And the reason for that is because very wealthy people change how they earn money, so that they're not earning an income, they're making a capital gain. If you try to tax their capital gains at rates that are too high, they'll do something else. They'll hang on to the asset, they'll borrow against it. There's all sorts of different ways to duck and weave the tax system. So I don't think
what I'm saying right now, you're jumping into loopholes and ways to get around.
No, hang on. No, I'm answering your question. If you let me, I am going to answer your question. So that's my issue with what happens with the tax system. I think that when it comes to regulations, if you have a look through any decade or any couple of decades, and you look at the greatest growth that you see, it always is in the industries that are the least regulated. What tends to happen is, as those companies become more mature, those companies themselves will start to ask for regulations. And the reason why is because they can basically lock out new competitors. Even if you were to make it a more progressive regulatory environment so that the companies at the top have more regulations, they'll comply with them. But realistically, what they'll do is they'll duck and weave. I think they will duck and weave, and then they'll end up going back to those smaller companies and will hurt them. And a very good example of this was, I believe it was Mattel, one of the doll makers. So they had some sort of issue with some sort of chemical or something, I'm not 100% sure, with the dolls that they were manufacturing. They ended up supporting new safety rules for children's toys. And what ended up happening was that only the very, very small toy manufacturers, as in the one guy working out of his garage as a hobby, got the exemption. But if you had, if that guy became good and he wanted to employ 5 people, he didn't get the exemption. And so he ended up basically being priced out of the market. And that's my fear if you tried to do what you said. I don't think that practically it would work.
Well, there are certain regulations that we're definitely going to need in any industry because we cannot go completely unregulated. Unregulated leads to, matter of fact, there was a movie, I forgot the name of the 2 guys who saved the world or whatever, but they talked about how, I think it was DuPont and Bhopal, how DuPont was putting up these chemicals and it completely ruined a whole town. And they did not want to pay for anything of that town. That's completely unregulated. The burning of metals when, you send off, and I hate to say it, but you send off a lot of the recycling of the PCs, the motherboards, and the other electronics and technologies. When those go sent off to, say, for instance, China, where it is completely unregulated, they are actually burning or melting the metals that are connected to those circuit boards. And actually, that's doing it in a very unregulated and unhealthy environment. So it's killing a lot of people. You have that one company, was it Foxconn or one of the other companies, where they're working people to death, literally, where people were trying to jump out of the building and actually kill themselves. And you know what they did to solve that is they put out suicide nets to catch people. So instead of actually putting in regulations and stipulations to help those individuals from dying and wanting to commit suicide, the company instead put out suicide nets so they can catch them and put them back to work. That's completely unregulated. We cannot have that. So regulations, yes, there have to be some, but what I'm talking about are in those regulations all the way down the board are those penalties, because the companies are not going to be able to pay the same penalties at that same cost. So if Google is paying $10,000, it's much easier for Google to pay $10,000 than it is for some mom and pop shop to pay $10,000. So I'm talking about.
I get the point that you're trying to make, and I am not advocating for a completely unregulated environment. Let's flip this the other way and go to a much more significantly regulated environment like Sweden. If you try to operate a business in Sweden, you're actually going to do quite well. I don't like the tax system in Sweden, but the corporate rate of tax is only 21%, so it's not too burdensome. But what happens in Sweden is the way that they help you with their businesses is that government workers and government regulators will actually assist you to comply with the regulations. That's not what we're saying in the United States or Australia. What we're saying is that going after somebody and prosecuting them becomes a sport. John Stossel did a report on this a handful of years ago where somebody got prosecuted for importing fish the wrong way and ended up being jailed for 8 years. This is just a mum and dad fish shop. So that's the problem, is it becomes a sport. And I don't think that, again, I agree with what you're saying that, look, we should give smaller fines to smaller businesses and bigger fines to bigger businesses. But again, the reality is that big companies can afford to pay big fines, and they just factor it into their cost of business. They'll actually do a cost thing and say, how much money will we make by breaking these rules? And if we get caught, it's going to be 5 years or 10 years before we actually get prosecuted and have to pay the fine. How much money will we make on that extra money that we've earned? And by that point, the damage is done. The small business that only copped a $5,000 fine while the bigger business copped a $50 million fine, that bigger business will absorb that because, again, they've got that economy of scale. So I don't really, just in my opinion, I don't really think that that's going to be a solution. I think we need to see more responsive government And I think we need to see people who are prepared to work with businesses to comply with regulations, to treat their workers well, and to be, good citizens. Companies, if they want to be called individuals and have the same sorts of rights as individuals, should be required to be good, responsible citizens to the countries in which they operate.
Yeah,
And
right.
Shaquille and Nick, and this is just my question for both of you is, and actually, if Jacoby, you want to jump in, and Rick, but they just said that there are 4.26 billion people worldwide that are using social media, and they're saying that by 2027 that'll be up to 6 billion. So pretty much at least 3/4 of the world will be using social media of one sort or another. So for those of you that have been fortunate, and I have not been fortunate enough to travel the world, how are other countries regulating something that is so vast and so big of an institution? Because that's what I'm trying to figure out, is how you can regulate something that is that big. We're talking about what the population of the world is 8 billion, and let's just say that it goes up to 9 billion. That would be 6 billion out of 9, which is 2/3 of the world that'll be on some sort of social media or another.
Yeah. Well, why do you want to regulate it? Rick, did you have a comment? I'm sorry. Rick?
Yeah, just that Sweden has 6 million people. The U.S. has 330 million. The smaller, some of like the Baltic countries and so all these little countries with like 5 million people can be more nimble. Like the it takes a lot to the U.S. I want to go back to the big business of Elon Musk. Over the weekend, I read that he is now set the record for money lost, personal wealth lost by a single individual. That he's lost, I don't know, over $100 billion in estimated worth since he bought Twitter. And he may have to sell Twitter to save his other 200 billion. I mean, he may have to sell Twitter just to save his what is with makes him look foolish, and is down 70%.
Yeah.
I'll respond to that. I think he's frozen up.
Yeah,
Rick. So we didn't catch everything that you said, Rick. If you're back with us, because you sort of froze up a little bit, it was buffering. But look, I think it's a little bit of an unfair assessment of Elon Musk. The tech sector fell really dramatically. The other thing to remember is that Tesla stock was trading at a 1,200, and Nick and I were talking about this last year.
1,200 times price.
1,200 PE ratio, price to earnings ratio. And I said to Nick, and I said to some other people, in finance or on our shows, I'm not personally aware of any company that's ever been at that sort of a PE ratio. To put it in perspective, the banks will normally be, 10, 20, 30 times. The tech companies might be at, 100 times. But a 1,200 PE ratio just seemed gigantic. Having said that, when they got to 500 and 600 and 700 PE ratios, people started short selling them, and they just kept going. They kept going up and up and up. So the fact of the matter is that, yes, Tesla stock has fallen dramatically, and that's caused his net worth to fall. But Facebook also fell significantly. People have criticized Elon Musk for firing 70% of the workforce. He probably has sacked more people than he needed to. But again, the whole tech sector let a lot of people go just in this recent period of time. So, I think you've got to put things in perspective. I think a better criteria of how is he doing and how is he running Twitter, for example, is going to be where they are in 5 years. Are they going to be bankrupt? I don't think so. I don't generally think so. But one of the significant issues is how much debt they've got. The suggestion at the moment is that the debt holders, because it's not a public company, they can't sell the debt on the open market, so they're kind of stuck with it. Unless they can do an over-the-counter transaction, what are they going to do with the debt? A lot of people are suggesting that Tier 1 debt, would probably be yielding around 15%. That would imply that you'd be looking at somewhere in the 20-30% range, say 25% for Tier 2 debt as a yield on your money. That could be a problem. That could be an issue for Twitter, depending on how he manages it moving forward. Is it a good idea for him to buy it? Was he buying it for financial reasons? Was he buying it to make a statement? Who knows? But
we do know.
I
We do know
certainly
why he bought it.
I certainly wouldn't I wouldn't hold it against him that his net worth decreased so significantly, because let's be honest, his net worth also increased very, very dramatically. And I didn't call him a genius then, so I'm not going to call him a failure now that it's fallen back.
Hey, Nick, Andrew told me, because it might even be a good guest for the Gamers Den as
Hold on.
well. But I was just seeing that Emma Lemke and her friend, a Brown University student, apparently she's a student in California, Alessa Coppins, have founded something called Technically Politics, a youth lobbying and advocacy group that pushes for social media regulation. So they are definitely not part of some of these other lawsuits, but they're out there saying that we need these kinds of lawsuits. And apparently they had something, and maybe Rick knows about it, that passed this recently in California called the California Age Appropriate Design Code Act, landmark legislation that requires online platforms to build in safeguards to mitigate risks for all users who are under 18, and that law will take place next year in 2024. So one of the things that Lemke said is that tech companies need to be held responsible by lawmakers in order to be accountable. They need to innovate for young people. They need to innovate for their users, so that we're building technology that will be in service of society rather than exploiting the user base that they've built. That is what she said, and maybe we can get her on the Gamers Den or one of the other shows as well.
Maybe come on the media show. I want to see where all this exploitation. I've seen these types of suits, but to me they're frivolous at best. You know, look, if you see this, you don't like your kid having it, take it away. Oh, I can't do that.
Nick, I think that's
That's
incredibly unfair. If you've got a, not that I don't have children, but if you've got a 12-year-old or a 15-year-old, I've got nieces.
Sure.
You try taking their phone off them. You know, it's not going to work. That's not they're not growing up in the world that we grew up in, right? So, you know, that this is a tool that they're used to using. Jacoby, I know you've been trying to say something before.
So just to touch on the regulations around kids and stuff, yes, that's got to take place. It's going to take place. It happened offline because we've regulated playgrounds to make it safer for kids to go and play on. We can't just say, hey, if your kid doesn't want to play at this park, don't go play at that park. No, it's a regulation that binds every park to make sure that they're not using metal slides that burn people now to utilizing plastic slides or other slides or other things. So yes, regulations are going to take place for safety reasons, because kids are going to use these things, and we just can't turn our head and say that they're not.
Hey, Jacoby, I was in
So
a
what you're going
clubhouse
to
room.
do, Jacoby, just so I'm clear, we're going to regulate the bejeebers out of this, which you can instantly turn off, but you're not going to regulate guns in the United States.
I completely agree with that.
That's brilliant.
Guns is the reason we don't touch guns is because it's a religion, and it's
Hang on. Guns aren't regulated in America. In what state are guns not regulated in America? Guns aren't regulated in California. Guns aren't regulated in New York.
Do
To
you
the
realize,
point that
Shaq, let's not go down this road.
Supreme Court about it. Come
No,
on.
Let's not go down this road, Shaq, because
Jacoby and
Hold on.
Shaq, just really quickly, because one of the things I was in a clubhouse room, and one of the things that they were talking about was whether schools should actually commandeer those phones, because a lot of times what they have is those phones and sometimes the laptops. And I was just wondering anybody's thoughts on that.
yes,
I know there have been some places where they do that.
there are schools that do.
Cell phones away. Take them away.
Yeah, there are schools and there are classrooms that you do have to check in and take your phone away. That's normal, and that happens. And there's nothing wrong with. I don't think that it should be an across the board regulation for all schools, because kids are different. But again, it's just how that school handles their regulatory policy dealing with cell phones, because every school has one. In terms of guns, Shaq, that's crazy, because there are loopholes that people get through, and it's already proven. So we can do all.
You don't want me to respond. When I went to respond, you said JK there, okay?
When they don't have
and the reason I responded was because you said it's a religion, okay? People have a different view to you on guns, so you don't need to just say that it's just like a religion. They're all part of some gun-loving, nut job group, which is basically what you implied. But I'm happy to leave that issue aside. I mean, let's not even go to guns.
We might have a point.
Regulations.
It is a religion.
Are we going to turn this into a gun debate?
Individuals, just as I was having a discussion with somebody today, any regulation, they have already conceded that if you stop AK-47s from being sold, then you're taking my guns away and my protection away. even though you can still get a handgun.
Hey, Jacoby, just to pivot the
That-
conversation.
yeah,
Hold on a second.
that is-
So Jacoby, again, I'll ask you again, because everyone else on the panel agrees with you except for me. So let me ask you again. Did we want to stick to media and regulation of cell phones?
Let's
Or
stick
did we
to
want to have a gun
Yeah,
debate?
we can
Because
have
it's pretty-
a discussion
pretty
of
unfair
guns
of
on
you.
another day, on another show, and everything. But I was actually
It's
going
pretty
to
unfair of
end.
you.
Why are we
It's pretty
regulating?
unfair of you to have your say and have a crack, and then make sure that I can't respond to it. So as I said, and I'll say it again,
You're going on a
prepared to let
tangent now.
I'm prepared to let it go.
I
I'm
have
prepared to let
pointed
it
out.
go.
I
If you want to have a
responded
gun
Nick
debate,
said.
if you want to have a
Jack,
gun
you're
debate,
trying
let's
to
do a
do this
different show.
again.
But
You're
not
trying to have the last say and not listening to actually what's going on. Nick had brought up, hey, we regulate cell phones more than we regulate guns. I had made a comment in response to what Nick said in agreement. You wanted to jump in and say that, oh my goodness, you were wrong. You were calling all of us gun nuts who love guns. And I
But I didn't
responded
say- I didn't say
to you.
all of
So
us gun
now
nuts.
you're
I'm not a
going on
gun
a
nut.
tangent and trying
I'm
to.
not a gun
Let's
nut,
go-
and I
let's
said
end this
I would let it
debate
go.
around
But
guns
then you
and
wanted to
jump
come
back
back
to
and give me
cell
another lecture
Let's go
about
back
it.
to
So let it go.
Hey,
Let
Jacoby
it
and
go.
Shaquille,
And if
hold
you
on a
want to
second.
talk
No,
about
Jacoby and
guns,
Shaquille,
let it
hold
go.
on.
And if you want to talk about guns,
go for
come
it,
on to
Mark.
World Edition
I'm
and we can
listening,
Jacoby
Mark.
debate
and
that
Shaquille,
laws.
just a quick
If you
question.
want to
This is
talk
actually
about guns,
geared more
let it go,
toward.
and we can debate it on World Edition.
We're going, Shaq. We already moved past. We moved
Yeah,
past.
and Jacoby, one of the questions I've heard and we talked about on the show as well, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about it. But anytime that there is an incident involving video games, then of course the video game is blamed and everything. And I know that there's been a recent incident, I think it was maybe in the last year or two, where a teen committed suicide, and now they're saying that that particular teen watched a simulated hanging video on Instagram several times before he actually went ahead and carried out the suicide. So is there any sort of responsibility that we need to have with some of these games that are violent in nature, and maybe they need to have some sort of limitations on who can play those games or who can watch those games, and maybe they need to have a certain amount of responsibility in order to even deal with certain kinds of games or some sort of education around certain games?
like mental health checks.
So
Something
games.
like they're proposing with guns.
Jacoby?
Somebody's got their panties in a
No,
bunch.
no, we're
Games
talking about video
themselves-
games. Video
Games
game
themselves-
regulation.
Yeah, games themselves actually are pretty regulated. And there are different regulating bodies around there. Many of the big developers do have psychologists and psychiatrists on their boards that actually look into their games. Games are an easy outlet for people because of are an easy scapegoat for people because one, the industry is still brand new. At one point, it used to be music. At another point, it used to be movies. At another point, it used to be TV shows. Now,
At
it's
another
the
point, it
time
used
of
to be
games come
guns.
around.
But in that same ilk,
Somebody
I guess
still got
the
their
question-
panties in a bunch.
Yeah, because
Maybe take the
all
bait.
right, let's just be consistent.
So,
Hang on, let me respond.
getting
Let me
back to
respond. Let's
Shaq, hold
be
on. Let me
consistent
finish
here.
my point. Let me finish my point.
You
please.
never let me finish mine, but okay.
It's okay. Good. So, getting back to video games being an easy scapegoat, so Grand Theft Auto. There was actually a case years ago when the whole I'll start with ESRB. The ESRB came about way back in 1993, I think it was, when games were. There was a game called Night Trap. We did it on we actually did played Night Trap or played the videos of Night Trap on the Gamers Den. Basically, Night Trap was like Home Alone in a sense, but there was this house party, and you're having to be the surveillance system for this house party, and you were protecting people from these vampires, but they were just all dressed in black. You didn't know they were vampires. They were just walking around the whole house. So people really felt offended that these individuals were coming through and kidnapping these people or attempting to kidnap these people, yet they were freaked out. So when they saw this video game way back in 1993, they decided, okay, well, we're upset at the gaming industry. It's an easy out. It's why people are attacking people. This is what's going on. So what they did is they created what's called the ESRB. The ESRB is similar to the same rating system as what they do for movies. So they put this in there. So in 1994, going into 1995, you had to be a particular age to buy a mature video game. So, for example, Mortal Kombat, which actually wasn't the reason for the ESRB, but had simulated violence, that actually became a mature game, and you had to be at least the age of 18 to purchase that game, or you had to have your parent or guardian purchase that game. So the ESRB came about, and that was one of the regulations. Then later, as games like Grand Theft Auto, more open world games and more intense, I guess, entertaining games, and a lot of kids were playing like Modern Warfare and so on and so forth, lawsuits actually started hitting these gaming companies. So therefore, what the gaming companies did in respond was they actually hired these psychiatrists and psychologists to look at games. And they found the same. They were able to show data that disproved all of these allegations and all these attacks on the gaming industry. Yes, games can be extremely violent, and there are games that, such as Postal, where you were actually a postal worker. Actually, Gary Coleman was one of the images that was used in this game because he sold his likeness to be in this game. But in Postal, it was a first-person shooter. You walked around, and it did very despicable things. One of the things that it did is that it actually grabbed a cat and used a cat as a silencer for a gun, and you would go around and killing people. So, and it actually was a horrible game that never really got pushed out there because, again, it was regulated to the mature audience. Nobody liked the game because the game mechanics sucked. And so not even kids were playing the game. And we cannot act as if kids aren't playing these games. Kids are playing Grand Theft Auto. They are. But as a parent, what you need to do is know what those kids are playing and understand what those kids are playing, and realizing that the kids are playing, and realizing why kids are playing games and why adults are playing games. Because the main reason that kids and adults, actually anybody's playing a game, is an outlet. They utilize these games as a outlet, just as somebody goes to a basketball court and plays basketball because they're frustrated, or goes to a boxing arena or a boxing rink and goes and gets into a boxing match. They don't go outside of that basketball court and then get into a giant fight because, that's what we learned at boxing, or that's what we learned. No, they use it as an outlet for relief and stress relief. We all find those, and games are here to stay, and games are only growing. And it's just a matter of us becoming more educated as what these games are, especially the ones that the kids are playing, how these games tell stories. One of the best games that just came out a few years ago, called The Last of Us. There are millions of people who watch The Walking Dead, but The Last of Us is getting produced by HBO, and it should come out next Sunday, as a matter of fact. I'm going to do a show about that. But there's a game called The Last of Us. The Last of Us is about a post-apocalyptic world, and there's a zombie virus outbreak and so on and so forth. But kids are playing games like this, but you're also watching the same TV show that the adult is watching. So it's just a matter of understanding entertainment for whom and why they're entertained by those.
Shaquille, the new game coming out is called Trading Currencies Internationally on Wall Street. Maybe you should play that game.
I'd probably lose.
Or Rick, there's a new game called IQ Test from Around the World. You can go play.
I'd probably lose the trading currency game, because no doubt to be made by some tech nerds in California that don't know how the markets work. But let me now finally respond to David. I was only going to make a little short, quick little thing, but now that you've gone on that big long explanation about why your particular outlet shouldn't be regulated.
I can say
the obvious things, like if you think that people go to a gym and they have an outlet when they're boxing at the gym, right? Well, I think that people can go to a firing range and get their outlet there as well. All of the things that you just said about the gaming industry could be applied to guns. But I'll, as I said, I'll leave it alone because they're cheap shots at you. And, you know, I happen to like your Constitution, your Bill of Rights, and the rest of the amendments that you have. So what I will say is in relation to Grand Theft Auto, I know that was a game that came out when I was a teenager, and there was a lot of people that would say this is going to destroy the youth. It's going to encourage people to, you know, you'd get on the footpath and you'd run people over, you'd go into police chases, all that sort of stuff. And we are seeing a lot of that. People have blamed, as you said, they've blamed music, they've blamed media, they've blamed movies. And I'm glad that you actually said that even if you do have an age limitation on the games, that people can buy them from, you know, they get their parents to buy them. Or, you know, I bought my first Playboy magazine when I was in year 7 at the age of 11 because I got it from one of the year 9s who got it from his older brother in year 11. So, you know, I mean, kids are going to do, if you tell them they can't do something, it's age restricted, they're going to find a way to do it. But I don't think that things should be regulated too highly. I think that we just need to perhaps be a little bit more connected as a society and keep an eye on what we're doing. Certainly, I wouldn't support for the gaming industry the kind of nonsense that you would propose inflicting upon the gun industry.
Well, see, you can't keep trying to say that, oh, the game industry can be regulated. It's a thing used to kill people. Literally, that's why it was built.
Jatobi, there are games that have simulated.
Tell me a game that is literally built to kill people.
Let me respond to you. There are games that have simulated real life.
We're done. Conversation over.
And the people
simulated. Done. We're over.
For somebody who gets his knickers in a knot when I don't let you finish or interject, you certainly have a lot of interjections, haven't you? You went for 6 minutes. I've gone for like 90 seconds.
Yeah, I said nothing about the gun industry, and you still got your panties in a bunch over it because guns were
jump on.
Guns were built to kill people.
You had to jump on and say something about it.
Entertain people.
You had to jump on and say something about it. I said to you, let's discuss it on a different show, and you still had to come back and say something about it.
Guns back. I said nothing about guns.
Oh, okay. Let's play back the tape after.
Let's
let me respond to you. If I'm not interrupted, I'll be less than 30 seconds.
We'll do guns later. Let's hear what Rick has.
All the things that you just said.
Shaq, let's talk about Rick. Rick was about to speak. Shaq, let Rick speak.
Okay. You win. You've talked over me enough. I won't even respond. There you go.
Violence.
Rick, go ahead.
All right. So violence are out of the barn problems. We're not going to get rid of pornography. We're not going to get rid of violence in video games or in movies or on TV. You have to figure out how to address all that stuff with kids. Like, you know, I didn't see my first hardcore sex pictures till I was 13. Now every kid has seen it, you know, by age 10 by accident. And you have to talk to kids about that. What you see in porn is not how actual people have sex, and you don't have to have sex, you know, right now. It's rather than regulation, it's probably education, because this, you know, violence and sex are every place. Point, you're not going to clean that up.
Okay.
Rick is
well, here's what we are going to clean up. We're at the end of the hour, so we want to thank our attendees for the media show, and we'll see you next week. We'll either be discussing guns or the death of TikTok. Until then, next week on the media show. Bye-bye.